Thank you for joining the webinar today. We will begin momentarily as people sign in. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Mooney, the Digital Marketing Manager at TPGI. Excited for you to join us for today's webinar, Enabling an Accessible SDLC, People, Process, and Technologies, with our speakers, Chase O'Quine and Mark Miller. I'll let them introduce themselves in a moment, but before we get started, just want to cover a couple of housekeeping items. First off, this session is being recorded and we will email everyone the recording after the event. We have captions available. Feel free to use those as needed. And lastly, if we have time for live Q&A, our speakers will respond to those questions at the end of the session. Please use the Q&A box in your dashboard and they'll get to as many of those as they can. And lastly, if anyone needs any accessibility support or training or has any questions, feel free to reach out to us and our experts can help assist you and your team. And with that, I will let Mark and Chase get started. Mark?
Mike, thank you very much. And thank all of you for being here. We're super excited to present for you guys today. This is a fantastic topic, one that Chase and I are both very passionate about. So we appreciate everybody joining. First of all, I'm going to turn it over to Chase. Chase, can you introduce yourself to the wonderful folks?
I can and will. Hi, everybody. My name is Chase O'Quine. I am the Chief Architect for TPGI. My teams handle creating all the software, et cetera, for our platform. I've got over 15 years of enterprise development experience with Fortune 50, Fortune 500 companies. I am passionate about systems level design, so systems of systems and how we think of things at an all the other level. You can find me on GitHub, LinkedIn, or Twitter at Chase O'Quine.
Thanks, Chase. And I am Mark Miller. I have my own slide here if I can get to it. I'm director of emerging accounts and platform here at TPGI as well. I've been in accessibility for around 8 years, maybe a little more at this point. I host the Real People, Real Stories podcast, which you can find on our website. My big passion in accessibility is really about organizational strategy, and you'll find that my passion and Chase's passion sort of blend well together in this topic for you all. All right, so what we're going to go over today is we're going to discuss what digital accessibility is, and then we're going to go into continuous accessibility. Accessibility, a lot of people sort of think of it as something that they have to go do, and there'll be an end to that task. And we're going to talk about how you treat accessibility when you realize it is something that is ongoing. Organizational changes that are necessary, the tooling that can support that, how automation can support that, and what best practices around that look like. So let's start with what is digital accessibility. So what is digital accessibility? Disabilities change the way that people consume digital content, right? So if you think about somebody who's blind or low vision, they rely on a particular technology called a screen reader to read the content aloud. Or they use something called a screen magnifier, which really magnifies the screen to the point where somebody with low vision can see it. And some people are in a place with their vision where they actually use a combination of the two technologies. If you think about somebody with limited mobility, much like a person who is blind, they can't use a mouse, or they might not be able to use a mouse. So they rely on the keyboard to navigate through content on the web that some of us might use a keyboard and mouse for. And those with cognitive disorders may only be able to focus on a disparate pieces of content rather than the entire page. Cognitive is interesting. I actually would consider myself in this category of people with cognitive disabilities because I have dyslexia and ADHD both, which is a whole lot of fun. But I don't necessarily need to accommodate the way that somebody who's on the autistic spectrum very deeply might need to. So I certainly appreciate it when things are a little less distracting. And then a person with a hearing disability, somebody who's deaf, they may not be able to hear, or they won't be able to hear any of the auditory content. So they very much rely on things like captions and transcripts to understand the content that's being conveyed auditorily. So what then makes websites and documents accessible, right? And remember, we're thinking about this in a digital sense. So the web, documents, applications you might use, all those sorts of things. An accessible website is one that enables people with disabilities. So we sort of covered 4 categories: cognitive, motor, visual, and auditory. It enables them to have a comparable experience to those without a disability. And this idea of an equivalent or comparable experience is very important. Keep that in the back of your mind as Chase and I continue to kind of go through the content, that is really the goal that we're always trying to achieve. Every user who comes to your site should at least be able to accomplish key tasks, right? If there's a form they need to submit, they should be able to do that. If there's information or content they need to consume or read, they should be able to do that. If there's a document that they need to open up, they should be able to do that, right? Watching videos, logging into a portal, all these actions that you would expect to be able to do when you go on the site should be able to be done by people with disabilities. And if people are unable to complete these tasks due to their assistive technology not working the way it needs to interact properly with the website, then it's not accessible. That's a really easy way to think about it. And it could be their assistive technology, or it could be their method of interaction. So somebody who just uses a keyboard, it needs to work with just the keyboard. So there may not even be a specific technology in play. So there's a few different reasons why you might think about accessibility, right? Why you might, as an organization especially, want to take on accessibility as a mandate, or as something that you're going to do when it comes to creating your digital content. And the first one is what we kind of have under this category that we're calling moral implications, right? You can think about it as sort of social responsibility, or your corporate social responsibility. So corporate social responsibility is a critical factor, and it ties into brand perception, right? And we'll go into that a little bit. Corporate responsibility nurtures, grows, and protects brand and reputation value, potentially up to 11% of the total perceived value of that company. It's not just an outward perception. Employees feel more positive towards employers that foster a sense of inclusivity, right? And inclusivity is another great word and way and thing to think about when we think about accessibility.
Now, Mark, what are you seeing on the moral implications of this? I know one of the things I've noticed, and I've heard from executives and from business leaders and technology leaders, that there's a big focus on D&I, diversity and inclusion in organizations. Do you think that's playing a factor of what we're seeing in these organizations, or do you think it's motivated elsewhere?
So that's a great question and a great thought. I'm really glad you brought it up, because I do see, so I'm on the front lines and talking to organizations all the time, and I do see an uptick in that being one of the reasons why organizations are focused on accessibility. It comes from all sorts of different places, right? So it's not a single driving factor, but as they're thinking about their diversity, equity, and inclusion, that includes people with disabilities. And it's also, I see it with organizations that have been trying to evangelize for accessibility, and now a diversity, equity, and inclusion program comes in, and they have something to tie that to. Yeah. So it becomes a better vehicle for them to evangelize. Go ahead, Chase.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, that's really that was my only question on that. And I think I'm seeing the same things by and large, and it's been a really good boon to getting people thinking more broadly within their organizations about sure, how they help people. So yeah,
for sure. Thanks. Great point. All right, so the business implications is the other thing that I wanted to talk about. So what does this matter to the business, right? And this is an important concept to understand, because when you want to introduce a program like this, or when a program like this surfaces, the businesses kind of have that natural question. They ask, what's in it for us? How is this going to help the business improve, right? Well, the good news is there's quite a decent ROI on it. So a couple of the factors here is that a substantial segment of the world's population, right, somewhere around 15%, according to the World Bank, and the US population, 61 million, identify with having a disability. That's a lot of people, right? Total after-tax disposable income of working age people with disabilities is estimated to be about 490 billion. And that's according to the American Institute for Research. So there's significant customers out there that have disabilities, and they got money, right? Inaccessible job applications portals and organizational intranets prevent companies from employing a truly diverse workforce. And if you look at the statistics around diversity in the workforce, it's unbelievable the value that people with disabilities really contribute to an organization. And then there's also, Title III implications where you're supposed to be hiring people with disabilities. But more than that, they're an incredibly valuable group to add to your to the bank of employees. People with disabilities tend to be the most loyal customers, and I can tell you this firsthand because Chase and I both work with a lot of people who have disabilities, and when they have a successful interaction on an e-commerce site, for example, they continue to go back, right? For lots of reasons. One, they appreciate the fact that somebody took the time to make a site inclusive and inclusive to them. And also it just works, right? Why are they going to fool around with something else that doesn't work? I mean, I do the same thing. I'm a person with a disability, but I do the same thing in areas that I wouldn't consider to be accommodating, right? Or accessible. I do it just because I like the way one site works better than the other. Once they find a product or service that satisfies their needs, it's often more trouble than it's worth for them to switch.
So if I could paraphrase some of this, so it sounds to me like, outside of just like caring because it's the right thing to do from a person perspective, it sounds like from a business perspective, it makes a lot of financial sense to care deeply about accessibility within your organization, and that there is quite a lot of money available from the aging population and just from the population generally as it relates to disabilities, as well as lifetime customers and great employees that you might be missing opportunities on, especially in a labor market right now where it's sometimes difficult to find good people for your organization.
Yeah, great point, Chase. I think I'm really glad that you brought up the aging population. A lot of people think of people with disabilities as that person who was born blind or was in the military and saw action and came back with some sort of a disability. And really, it's my parents, it's your parents. As we get older, these things start to creep up on us. And these are people who are currently customers, right? That want to continue to do business the way they always have. So there's also legal implications out there. And I don't want to spend too much time on this. The bottom line is I think we're all aware that there's a level of legal risk and there's action out there, especially in the US. Disability lawsuits are super real, right? And they increase the risk for companies of all sizes. The Department of Justice has continually stated that websites fall under what's called public accommodation. So Title III of the ADA, there's a section of it that basically says places of public accommodation. And typically that would be your bank, a library, the local park, the town hall, these physical places of public accommodation. Well, guess what? Somewhere around 2000 and beyond, we all started banking, shopping, I register my car online. I'm not even walking to the town office anymore. So the internet and the Department of Justice is saying, hey guys, stop arguing. This isn't the case. The internet is falling under this public accommodation. Website accessibility lawsuits tripled from 2017 to 2018. I know we're past 2019, but they kept going up in 2019. There's a lot of data on that. I didn't want to pour too much of that out here, but the point being is that there is a trend of lawsuits increasing on both a federal and in some state levels. So there's risk out there. All right. So a lot of people, when you take these three things, especially the last one, and you end up with this big kind of question mark at the end of it that says, well, what do we do? And there's this concept that you can't be perfect. Technology changes, it evolves. So as soon as you fix as much as you can, you're going to change that technology. And just like that might introduce bugs, and just like you need a process for finding those bugs and addressing them, technology is bugs that affect people with disabilities. So that same phenomenon is occurring, and guidelines are guidelines. There's no hard and fast, do these 10 things and you're all set. So the question becomes, like, how do we satisfy all these things that you're talking about, Mark? I was talking to the third person. And one of the ways that we can think about that is through something called substantial conformance. And really what substantial conformance means is that we're looking at Title III of the ADA that says public accommodation, places of public accommodation need to be accessible. People need to be able to get into a building, right? Think of it as simple as that. So if you have a wheelchair and there's a set of stairs, you're going to need a ramp, right? The web is the same thing. So one of the things that we look at is we look at what are the critical user journeys on the site? What are the main areas of a site that is really the intention of that site? For example, an e-commerce site, find a product, get it in the shopping cart, and check out. You should be able to do that at minimum, right? To have an equivalent experience. You also probably should be able to reset your password, because we all know we lose those passwords. And if we can't reset a password, it can really be a barrier to our ability to engage in the core function of that website or access core content on that website. So the action here, or the thought here, is that you want to make sure that the significant barriers, the things that would stop somebody, the big walls that might be in the way of somebody completing those tasks, we want to make sure that those aren't there. And this is not a concept of perfect. It doesn't mean every little image is tagged in this particular situation or has alt text associated with it. It doesn't mean everything works perfectly or every single guideline is met. It means that when a person with a disability tries to do something, they successfully can complete it. So go ahead, Chase.
So from that, what I'm gathering out of this, so there's a need for organizations and individuals to make sure that they are enabling other people to be able to do the same things as themselves, like at a core level. Like that's really all we're saying here. Everybody should be able to have access to do and live the same life as it comes to getting food, managing trips, going to the doctor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so whatever your field is individually, you want to make sure that you are creating accommodations so that individuals aren't in a position to be less than or othered as a result of that, and unavailable to leverage what you're offering. That is important from a moral perspective, that is important from a business perspective, and that is important from a legal perspective. But then we get into the problem of, what do you do about it? How do you actually, if you're not on that path, if you're trying to figure out how do you get your head around that, where do you start? If you could hit the next slide. So systemic problems require systemic solutions. And whenever we think about accessibility and we think about accommodations as a whole, or DE&I as a whole, these are generally not isolated issues to one thing within an organization or a system. And oftentimes what we will see is that organizations try to pin responsibility on one person's shoulders or a group of people's shoulders within that organization, but it is everybody's job. You can't solve these problems in an organization. You can't create diversity, equity, and inclusion in an organization if you're not involving everyone and making changes at all levels, and that put those needs forward. But in doing so, there are rewards for everyone involved. And so it doesn't just make sense because it is the right thing to do. It also makes sense from a business perspective holistically. Next slide, please. So that brings us into this idea of like what continuous accessibility is. And really it goes back to that idea that it is a systemic problem. So we want to work into all of our thinking from a business perspective, from a development perspective, from an execution perspective. How do we bake accessibility in to what we do as a part of our software development lifecycle? And as a part of that lifecycle, we can see that we start with our business idea. We go to requirement gatherings, mock-ups, code, review, commit, unit testing, deployment, integration testing, functional testing, delivery, and feedback. Those are all the parts that make up a deployment cycle. Now, whether or not your organization is calling each of those steps out individually, they are in some capacity happening. And so if we think a step further and we think about this a little more granularly, next slide, please, we can really break this into 4 phases: idea, development, testing, and delivery. So our entire software development lifecycle, all those individual pieces can really just be thought of as 4 main moving parts: the idea phase, the development phase, the testing phase, and the delivery phase. Next slide, please. So in phase 1, whenever we're thinking about ideas, this is really where accessibility starts. If we're not thinking about accessibility all the way from the point of inception of an idea, we're putting a lot of burden on a lot of the rest of the system to try and figure out how to make it happen later. And ultimately, that puts a lot of strain on the system, a lot of strain on individuals, a lot of having to redo things because you weren't putting accessibility in mind from the get-go. But what you will find is that if you start with accessibility at the onset, you will make decisions downstream from that accommodate that and ultimately simplify everybody's role from there forward. So our idea phase can really be thought of as 3 main parts: the business idea, the requirements gathering, and the mock-ups. And so this is where you want to incorporate, okay, I have this idea. Is this idea going to be difficult for someone with a cognitive impairment to use? Is this idea going to be difficult for someone who's using a screen reader to use? Is this idea going to be usable by other people and make sense? And so as a part of the requirements gathering process and your mock-ups, you can be baking those things in. And what's awesome is that the net result of that, if you put in that little bit of effort here, fulfilling on that effort becomes so much easier. Any thoughts or questions on that, Mark?
Yeah, the one thing I really wanted to point out here, Chase, I think this is such an important concept, right? And this phase, which I would kind of use loosely throw out there as sort of the design phase, right?
Yep.
Is oftentimes people, when they initially sort of decide to cross over and start thinking about accessibility, it's too late for this in a lot of cases, right? They have an existing website or they have something that's existing. And the fact of the matter is it's pretty arduous to remediate or improve that website in the ways that need to be done for accessibility, because they weren't, clearly thinking about that in the beginning. So when that same organization then says, wow, that was tough, we better start thinking about this, shifting left and thinking about this from the beginning. That process, that end process where that final code base is being looked at and shored up for accessibility becomes so much easier.
Yeah.
And it's so much easier and cheaper to put it in the beginning. So I just think it's very, very important. Most people don't have the luxury of starting here the first time they cross over, but boy, should you try and head here.
And there are ways that we as an organization can help with that as well. If you go to the next slide, Mark, if you'd like to talk about some of the things that we do.
So some of the things that we do, are strategy and program management, right? So this would be annual program management. This would be strategic consulting and program direction and prioritization on sustainability. So to Chase's point, this is really helping you look at your software development life cycle, looking at process areas in the organization that influence that life cycle, and making sure that everybody understands their responsibilities around it, and make sure that you've got this inclusion in all aspects of it. We're going to talk about phase 2, Chase.
Yeah, I do. So once we get past that kind of design phase and that ideation phase, we move into the actual creation and the development process. So this is where you get your engineers involved. This is where you get your UX teams involved, et cetera, and really start creating what you're trying to drive value from the business. Because ultimately, you as a business are there to create some form of value. What is your value proposition? What are you trying to deliver? So this is where you're actually executing on that vision. But if you as an organization are trying to take accessibility seriously, people will do what is easiest to do. By and large, people want to do the right things, but at the same time, most engineering firms, most engineering departments within organizations are grossly understaffed, grossly overworked. And so adding new requirements, adding new burdens onto those already tenuous and strained relationships can be very difficult. And so that's where you want to incorporate tooling and functionality into those processes and make investments into the way that the development lifecycle is handled, so that you can limit those burdens or remove them altogether. That's really the only way that you're going to get traction in a large scale, meaningful way. Now, again, what's great on greenfield projects, if we've done a good job on the design phase, and if we're thinking about this kind of holistically, that actually gets easier and easier over time rather than harder and harder over time. So you may have a big investment or a commitment up front that does require a little bit of effort, but if you're doing it in the best way possible, I'll put it that way, or in a really good way, because there's no right way necessarily, but if there are better ways. And if you are incorporating some of these ideas, it should feel easy and pretty much self-regulating over time. Next slide, please. I bring this into kind of part 3. So we go from the development phase into testing, and testing can really be thought of as 4 different parts: unit testing, deployment, integration testing, and functional testing. Unit testing being, like, does the code work? The deployment being, let's get it out somewhere. Integration, now that it's out somewhere, does it still work? And then functional tests, okay, we know that from a technical level it all works, but can a person use it? Like, those are kind of those 4 different areas there. And having robust testing and having robust ability to incorporate accessibility into those testing helps to facilitate that easier over time thing. Because if you've got good regression tests in, and if they can mostly be automated, then if you make a change and it's small, but it's impactful from an accessibility perspective, and you catch it early and often, well, it's okay to make mistakes. I'm a big fan of trying to create environments where it's okay to fail. It's okay to be wrong. It's okay to make a mistake. So long as you can catch it early, often, and resolve it and remediate it in a prompt fashion, it doesn't really change the net result of things, and still makes it easy to do from a process and procedure perspective. Next slide, please. So there's some things that we do as an organization to help facilitate this. The big one being our ARC platform. So our ARC platform is used by a lot of Fortune 50, a lot of Fortune 500 companies to help them manage their accessibility process throughout their entire organization. So there is sometimes a want to have an isolated accessibility department, and that is important for advocacy and for management, especially as it comes to risk management and et cetera. But it, as we stated earlier, it really takes the whole system and everyone being involved to create meaningful change. And so to that end, our customers track their progress through the ARC platform, which gives them a couple of really interesting advantages. One, lots of automation built in. Two, the ability to, in our enterprise platform, push those directly out into the development workflows. So getting those out into Azure DevOps or Jira or Trello or wherever it is that your development team is managing their workflow, as well as help desks and help desk tickets and resources that can be utilized directly by the development staff. So if they say, hey, it's good that I know that I need to do this, but what do I do? Like, I know, like, you've told me that this is broken, but I'm not even really sure where I start. We've got some awesome utilities as it comes to learning, both from an articles perspective, targeted training, and then just direct help desk tickets. A developer can reach out to us and say, hey, how do I do this? I know I need to do this, but how do I do this? And we can give them solid answers on that. And then lastly, our free ARC toolkit that's available in the Chrome store, putting this in front of developers so that as they are creating new features, as they're creating new usage for your product, as they're testing that, they can actually do that directly at their workstation and make sure that things are accessible as a part of that initial development process. So that way, all the way from the developer who is live coding and trying to create features, all the way into your development CI/CD process pipelines, and then up into your QA and functional testing, that whole realm of phase 3 and phase 4, or phase 2 and phase 3, get encompassed with some of the toolings that we have available.
Excellent.
So that brings us into phase 4, which is the delivery process. And you would think that if you're already at delivery, you're kind of done thinking about accessibility at that point, but that's not, it doesn't stop just because you've pushed something out. In fact, that's really where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. It's easy to miss opportunities for success, and it happens. And it's not something to beat yourself up about, but something to be aware of and to be able to address. So having the ability for users to report issues about accessibility and having a process in place that automatically prioritizes those issues really helps to make sure that your users are heard and happy. So as an example, within our organization, our prioritization process, our top 2 priorities, our top priority are critical failures. If we don't do this thing, nobody can use the platform anymore. Those are our number 1 priorities, because if we don't fix those, or if we don't address those, then nobody gets to use the platform anymore. Directly after that is accessibility. Is it able to be used by everyone? And so codifying those kinds of priorities into your engagement process are hugely valuable in making sure that these types of things actually get addressed. From a feedback perspective, last year we introduced this notion of JAWS Connect. So JAWS was the largest used screen reader in the world, and we have directly tied that feedback mechanism from that into ARC and into your systems and your processes, so that you can get feedback direct from screen reader users. It's an opt-in thing. It's free for websites, and then if you've got Windows applications, we can embed it into those as well for you. So that does have a charge associated with it, though. Next slide, please. aside from those services, we also have, as I mentioned earlier, our help desk support, instructor-led training, and one of the exciting things that we've got with Dr. David Sloan is accessible UX services. So we can really help you work at all levels around how to have inclusive designs within the features that you're trying to promote and create that will drive value into your business. So lots of really cool stuff that we have available for you from that perspective.
Yeah, a couple of points I want to just drive home here, Chase. First of all, I think you really made a great point about ARC in terms of its overall center for managing all these different aspects of accessibility. And that would include, like, a lot of people will use an organization like us to do expert manual testing. All of that is integrated into the platform as well. So all of the automated testing that Chase is talking about, you also want to make sure that you're, that only covers, if you're looking at it as a pure test, that only covers 30 to 40% of the actual errors. So this idea of manual testing through experts like us is super important to really understand in much greater detail where you stand, and having that be an integrated part of the whole process. And we can do that on a complete code base, which is sort of the traditional way that you can see it, but through the ARC platform and by componentizing that effort, we also can fit that into a sprint cycle, right? So it can fit right inside of your software development lifecycle, just like all the, just like connecting to your CI/CD pipeline, fits early into the process. And the other thing is I wanted to circle back around to this concept of ARC that Chase talked about, this ARC Capture, ARC Connect, where JAWS Connect, where we're actually connecting directly with JAWS users and allowing them, through the technology that they use, to give real-time usability feedback. This is very important because traditional usability testing can be very expensive, and it happens, how often can you do it, right? You would do a test every so often. But when you connect the population into your platform, you're now getting this feedback in real time all the time. So when you look at all three of those earlier points, from a social responsibility standpoint, you're showing that group of people that you care, right? From a business standpoint, you've got a continuous ready-made way to take what you're doing beyond technical conformance and really making sure it's useful for your users and build that loyalty that we talk about. And then from a legal perspective, I'm not a lawyer, right? But we see in a lot of these settlements that feedback from people that are actually people with disabilities using technology is a huge component of that. It can potentially satisfy that as well. So it's sort of a very simple concept to think about. Give screen reader users the ability to provide feedback, but it hits on so many important points.
And then likewise, one of the things I'll hit on real quick with this is, if you're a mature organization, if you take accessibility really seriously and like you've gone pretty far down that tunnel, we also have some advanced tools available that more and more of our enterprise customers are taking advantage of. If you want to take some of that manual testing process and QA process in-house, we've got some pretty interesting offers around that. And feel free to reach out to us if you feel like you're at a level of maturity where you really want to incorporate more of that deeply in-house.
We talked through this next slide pretty much, Chase.
Yeah, we pretty much talked through most of this.
Got excited.
We jumped the gun a little. That's okay though. So we'll talk a little bit about the pipeline. What's on the screen currently is a timeline left to right with some symbols that show the continuous accessibility process, starting with development, going to saving code, packaging code to be delivered, deliver build to staging or running the tests, checking the test outcome, and then delivering that build to production. If you'll hit the next thing. Overlaid are what parts of our platform help in each of those segments. So in the development phase, Arc Toolkit and our Arc API for unit tests next. For delivering to stage and running tests, our Arc API test initiatives next. If there is a pass, we can continue going forward to pushing to production. If not, we can go back to our development phase. There's a flow chart that shows that flow next. And then at the end of the pipeline, once we've delivered our Arc domain or user flow monitoring, will help let you see in your live production environment at whatever cadence makes sense for you. Are we making progress as a business on our accessibility goals? Next slide, please. So a couple best practices to keep in mind. The big one is investing for success. If like everything as a business, if you want to be successful with it, you have to align yourself for an investment. And investment doesn't just mean financial. That means time, that means effort. And it might also mean a financial investment as well, but that depends on what you want to do. Like all things, time or money. If you've got a lot of time, then there's a lot of ways to do it. So it doesn't really cost anything. If you're in a pinch for time and you need a lot of effort done quickly, well, it's probably going to cost more money. That's the nature of, that's not even accessibility. That's just business in general. As far as additional best practices, we really want to strive for inclusivity in all of your business processes and decisions. So good example of that, we talked about these different areas of the software development lifecycle. If you're not incorporating the people who are actually challenged by these things into those decision processes, if you're not actually talking to people who face these concerns, you're not really setting up for success. And so you want to be inclusive in your hiring. You want to be inclusive in the way that you deal with your customers. Just really try to incorporate people into what you're doing. Lean on experts. You probably have some in your organization. So I'm not just talking about us. I mean, lean on people in your organization that care deeply about this and can offer you some good sound advice. It's often easier to, as a business, to take the advice of the outsider, but you will find many people within your organization have some really good ideas and can be incredibly helpful in pushing forward a path towards accessibility within your business. Ask lots of questions and listen. And then lastly, this is big for me, automate as much as you can. You want to make this process one that is enjoyable, one that doesn't feel like a burden on top of the things that you're doing. And the easiest way to create a long-term investment is to invest in automation so that you don't have to tack on a lot of additional workload to your teams. Next slide. And then I'll let Mark kind of recap on that.
So to recap on sort of how we as an organization help our customers implement and achieve a lot of the different things that we've talked about today. The major categories of help that we're giving is with audits and reviews. And this is that concept of us coming in, looking against the technical standards for accessibility issues, right? As a set of experts that understand those standards, and then advising on how to remediate. Analytics and automation. So this is a lot of what Chase has been talking about within the Arc platform, within the monitoring and the analytics that you do around that data. UX design, right? So this is could be looking at design comps and annotating them for best practices and issues from a technical conformance standpoint. It could be testing the UX itself, and then QA and verification, right? So first phase, planning, integrate insights into planning using stories and code. Second, analytics, audits. This is accessible audits, manual and machine detectable. The third is design. This is the prioritization of inputs in the design phase, right? And again, the design is not all about technical conformance. Sometimes it's about best practice. It's about setting yourself up to be able to successfully include the things that you need to for accessibility. Implementation, this is, think about new features, functionalities in the builds. We have knowledge base, we have education, we have code annotations within both of those things. We also have Arc Toolkit that can really help that developer who's trying to include accessibility in the way they're coding, have the information, the education, and the tools they need to do that. The API is open. We have a RESTful open API for Arc. So you're able to integrate those checks anywhere you need to. So at the beginning of your CI/CD pipeline, when your developers are checking code in and running that code against all sorts of other checks, you can include accessibility in that. You also want to think about how you represent that accessibility. Do you need something like VPAT? Do you need to look at the statement on your public facing website? Do you need an accessibility conformance statement? There's different ways that you can represent what you've achieved there. And then, to Chase's earlier point, once all this stuff is done, you want to look at it on production. You want to make sure that everything is reaching production and in the way that you've intended, and use the success you're having in that final production output to inform changes throughout that whole life cycle.
Awesome. Next slide.
I think the next slide.
So the thing I want to close on is this. We're all mostly technical people, business people, et cetera, that are here. What I don't want to be lost on any of us is that you're dealing with human beings. These are real people with thoughts, feelings, emotions, wants, and needs. And so as we're thinking about accessibility, try not to get lost in the numbers, try not to get lost in the business aspect of this, and really try to remember that you're dealing with people, real people, and really, try to provide an inclusive experience within everything that you do within your organization. You will be amazingly well served by it. Any closing thoughts, Mark?
Yeah, the one thing that I really want to point out here, we went over a lot of stuff. We looked at the entire software development lifecycle, and we introduced a lot of concepts. And some of you may be looking at that going, wow, you really want to do all that. Remember that what's important is that you take the next step. There's no light switch here. You can't go back to your organization tomorrow, do something, and have all this implemented the way that we talked about today. It's important that you understand where you're headed. That's why this discussion is super important. But it's the analogy of how do you eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time. So when you go back and you think about this, don't think about all of these things that you need to do. Think about the next step that's going to start to progress you towards those end goals. And don't let this overwhelm you.
And to that end, if you ever need us to help in those conversations, if you are trying to help your leadership or business teams, et cetera, understand the importance of accessibility within your organization, reach out. We're happy to help. We're happy to guide those conversations in a way that really resonates and makes sense from a business perspective. So, because sometimes they will get lost in that. And so, please reach out.
And do us a favor. Don't feel like you have to have a pending engagement or about to be doing business with us or anything like that. I talk every day to people and help them out without it ever turning into an engagement. Yep. Or I shouldn't say without it ever turning into an engagement. One day it may, but to Chase's point, we've seen this over and over again. Don't reinvent the wheel. Just give us a ring. Let us chat with you a little bit, and we can sort of help you think about this, even if you're not ready to make big moves yet.
Awesome.
So with that, we would love to take questions. We had one question come in, which I think we've answered along the way, and that was, what are the best tools to automate 508 testing? So there's a lot of them out there. We talked about a lot of the ones that we use. Go take a look at Arc Toolkit, which is free. Chrome, it's a Chrome extension. That can be a great first sort of dipping your toe in the water, look at it. And then certainly if you'd like to see demos and really some of the other tools that we talked about in action, you can let me know.
And I'd like to add one thing to that. We've got two major things on the automation side, and that's our our domain monitoring tool and our user flow tool. The best way to think about those is one's a shotgun. One is like, okay, I don't even know really where I need to start at. So I'm going to look at everything, and that's our domain scanner. And then on the other end, like, okay, I found some areas and this section seems like it's got a lot of issues. A good example might be if you're a hotelier signing up, booking a night, booking a flight, an e-commerce store, checking out, stuff like that. And that's where our user flows come in. And those are much more of a scalpel approach. So you want to really isolate and look at individual things. And then that pipeline then feeds action. So that says, okay, well, I now know that there are these things wrong. I want to create action on those. And then you do it again. And then so you create a kind of circuit there. So, yeah.
Yeah, the other thing I would add is that there's tools out there too that can help with the manual testing process, right? A lot of what we've talked about is sort of automated scanning. But when you're doing manual things like screen reader testing, obviously those assistive technologies like JAWS, you definitely want to think about pulling JAWS in-house if you're going to do your own testing. And then we have other things like JAWS Inspect, which is very similar to JAWS, but the output is in text. So it's much more appropriate. It's not a complete replacement for JAWS testing, but for a lot of the things that you're trying to do with JAWS testing, it can make it much easier. Just simply from the fact that the output is in text, it eliminates that need to sit there and transcribe, but it presents things in a lot of other ways. So there's certainly a lot of tools to think about, and we could spend another hour talking about all of them. But
absolutely, it doesn't seem like we have any other questions. Is there anybody else that has any? So we either did an amazing job or a terrible job of answering people's questions as a part of the as a part of the main
go with
talk.
amazing, Chase.
That's me too. That's where I'm leaning.
When I tell my friends about this, I'm going to say amazing. Please let us know if you have other questions. I don't know if we can open the mic up to other people.
I don't think that we can.
But if not, there's a Q&A in the Zoom that you can use. Thanks, Anne. Anne says, thank you much for the great information. Have a great day.
Thank you very
Give
much.
it a few more minutes.
Anybody
Yeah,
has any other questions?
this was great for everyone. Really appreciate the time. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to send them to ida@tpgi.com, and I can pass those along to Mark or Chase to answer. But thanks for your time, guys, and have a great day.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.